All right, let's talk about evolution. And evolution is my favorite school of thought ever. I do not know where I would be in life without it. I would probably not, never mind. I adore evolution. So, with everything before, I was kind of making a template ahead of time and planning it out. But with evolution, I'm going to try and spitball it a little bit, and hopefully it'll be interesting and useful. Afterwards, we'll still have those practice problems to go over. So evolution. Uh, Evolution is a change within a population over time. That's all evolution is. People talk about survival of the fittest. That is evolution by natural selection. So if you look at the chicken population that like that produces our meat, we can see that they are freaking massive now. Like, look, 1957, in only 50 or so years, they quadrupled in mass. Now think about it. Like, you go to the store and you buy a chicken breast. Do you know like how huge that chicken breast is? Like, that is massive. And this was evolution. We changed this population of chickens, and it was not by natural selection. It was by artificial selection. So our artificial selection was humans and like farmers and stuff. We want to get the most bang out of our buck when we enslave animals and then slaughter them for fun. I mean for food. But so then we choose like the biggest ones that produce the largest gains, and that's how we have that really beefy chicken there. And there is nothing natural about that. Like it's not survival of the fittest. Like if you put that chicken in the environment, right, in the wild, that is not like a healthy chicken according to the environment, but to us it is. So that chicken evolved via like human selection. That's kind of cool, right? So but I am talking too much. Let's talk about evolution by natural selection, which is super neat as well because it explains so much about life. It's really neat. So there's evolution by natural selection. Okay, let me check the study guide real quickly to see what kind of stuff they want you to know. Okay, cool. So natural selection is where okay, it is a survival of fittest one. So you have a population, and then they live in an environment, and this environment has different stressors. The environment may have a certain kind of food, or it may be like really cold. So then like whatnot. Okay. So in an environment, the individuals within a population, if they survive to sexual maturity and they reproduce, they get to spread on their genes. So natural selection occurs in populations that have variability in alleles that are heritable. So what does that mean? Okay, so okay, okay, back then, right? Like let's say that this is like I don't know, like 20,000 years ago. We are in a hunter-gatherer society, and I am born, right? And like I'm massive, Like I by the time I hit 14, I'm like 6'10, And like I can kill anyone I want. Like I'm walking by the river, and then I see a guy, and then bam, I just smash his head into a rock, and I eat him for a tasty snack. Now that's pretty cool. And so I have super high survivability. Like I can kill whoever I want. I can defend myself. Like it's super cool. I mean, I don't have to defend myself. I can do like the other thing, like the rock hitting and the snack getting. I'm sorry, I'm so tired. But so the natural selection. So you have oh yeah, I'm some 6'10", behemoth, like I'm a real beefcake. But here's the thing, I am I'm infertile and impotent. So I'm both of them. Oh my goodness. Okay, so while I have these genes that make me like so cool, like in a real killer, I cannot spread those genes on. So that was a variability. Like everyone else in the village, they're just a bunch of simps. and I'm like the Chad, But so that's the variability. I have the Chad alleles and they have the simp alleles. But what happened is that because I am impotent and infertile, my alleles are not hereditable. So that is what you need in a population. Okay, so that is evolution with natural selection. It is survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. And we use fittest in this way because it relates to fitness, which is a huge natural selection. So fitness is the ability to survive and reproduce. Okay, so let's think about that. Survive and reproduce. So a thing that would incur a high fitness might be being a total beefcake. I can do whatever I want. You got beef with me, I'll kill you. So that could be like strength, or it could be there's a mutation, right? And I have acquired an allele that allows me to shoot out a very large sperm cloud that is aerial and impregnate all the women in the vicinity, and thus I have a higher rate of reproduction. Now, that doesn't mean I have a higher rate of survival. I'm just some dude, but I got that sperm cloud. So because of that sperm cloud, that is a high fitness allele. So okay. So what might happen within a population is because the individual with the sperm cloud is so successful at mating, then his progeny will inherit the same allele, and that allele will give them the same advantage in producing that sperm cloud. So eventually, it's so successful and it's such a high fitness allele that it'll sweep through the population. It'll change the population such that all of them have that sperm cloud trait. So that was a change in the allele frequencies over time. Oh my gosh, I did not even write down the definition of evolution, did I? So the evolution is the change in allele frequency of a population over time. And that's the important thing. Allele frequency, population over time. People are like, oh, but I wasn't a monkey, when they talk about evolution, right? But you weren't a monkey, Like what happened was that over time, that population acquired a little change by little change by little change by little change by little change. And then over all the hundreds of thousands of years, we reached this point. So it is a population. We don't really evolve individually. Like I love Pokemon, but like the term evolution still ticks me off about it, Because although, okay, let me think about my favorite Pokemon. Okay. I really like Quagsire, and then the Whopper comes before it, and then Whopper evolves into Quagsire, but that doesn't really happen because Whopper is not a population. Whopper is an individual, and Whopper doesn't really like evolve into Quagsire. That doesn't happen. It is a change in the allele frequency of a population over time. Because a given allele might have a high fitness, it becomes widespread within the population, or maybe it is a deleterious allele. And a deleterious allele means that it is a bad allele. So that might be an allele that it might be what would it be? An allele that causes blindness. Okay, so that would be herded out over time because it is not a fit gene. Okay, sorry guys, kind of went off the deep end a little bit. I've chilled out considerably. Let's get back to the exam review. So evolution is the change in the allele frequencies of a population over time. So this is not necessarily just by natural selection. Earlier we talked about artificial selection, which are humans breeding animals according to the traits that humans like, such that the animal population changes in that trait, but it wasn't due to natural selection or being fit. It was just because we wanted it to. Or it might be due to genetic drift. Or let's say that, okay, this is kind of a random thing. Right, let's say that Julie Ann Moore is holding a redhead convention, and people Julianne Moore is she's very cool, and every redhead in the world attends. But then a meteor comes and it hits the warehouse and it eliminates all the redhead alleles. So by chance, if you consider the human population on Earth as a whole, our allele frequencies of redheads went way down, and that was a form of evolution too. Okay, but the one that we will focus on the most is evolution by natural selection, which entails a change in allele frequencies of a population due to heritable differences in traits. And also, this would also be over time as well. So, what does this mean? This means that our heritable differences in traits. So, a trait might be, you know, being light skinned, or being like having dark fur, having light fur, and those would have to be heritable in order for those to have a difference in future allele frequencies. And adaptation is a trait that is well suited for an environment as a result of, I don't know why I put directional, selectional bias. So, okay, let me think of, okay, in the desert, because of the scarcity of water, many animals are extremely specialized. One animal is the dung beetle. So the dung beetle is kind of cool. So once it finds a piece of like a larger animal's droppings, it lives in that dung for like the entirety of its life, and it eats like that. It's able to digest it. Well, if you think about it, a trait is both behavioral and physical. So if you think about it, some people are prone to depression, or you probably share a lot of characteristics from your mom or your dad. So that behavior is heritable in many cases. But anyways, what is it? What was it? Oh, so this dung beetle. So what happened over time is that, okay, so in this environment that has such little water, you had a bunch of beetles. These beetles that were originally the population of dung beetles, and then after a while, one of them had a mutation that gave it the ability to digest feces efficiently. And this adaptation, oh no, this is not adaptation. This mutation that causes new allele was so beneficial that it spread throughout that population. So an adaptation is a trait that is well suited for the environment. The trait of being able to digest poop is well suited for that lack of nutrient and moisture environment. And that was a result of selection. That beetle who had that mutation was able to survive and then breed and then spread on its alleles. So adaptation. Cool beans. And now we're going to talk about modes of selection. So there are 3 modes of selection they want you to know about. There is stabilizing selection. There is directional selection. And there is disruptive selection. So I'll just put selection on that. There are such okay, so traits can be either discontinuous or they can be continuous. So a continuous trait would be something like height, because it ranges all the way from like the smallest possible to like a very high one. And then if you could find individuals such that you could order them by height, and they would go and it would be very easy to graph them. It would be logical to graph them as well. But a discontinuous trait would be something like okay, I know that you can interpret this different ways, but let's go with blindness. And I know people can be partially blind. Maybe this isn't the best example, but I've already started. So let's say that for argument's sake, you can only have 2 traits. You can either be have the wild type seeing allele, or you can just be blind. So those are discontinuous. There's no in between. I mean, there kind of is, but we won't really talk about that. As opposed to height, where there is a bunch of in between. So these modes of selection, we're really talking more about continuous traits. Okay, so whenever we have our graph, we have on this side, we have allele frequency. and on this side we have the trait. So okay, so we're gonna give an example for each one. Let's give a stabilizing selection example first, and we'll go with newborn. We'll go human newborn. Human newborn head size. Oh, we'll go with weight. Okay, so stabilizing selection is where like the average trait is the most fit, and then when you go outside of that to the extremes, like to the low amount of that trait or to the high amount of trait, they are less fit. So we would see something like this. Now, why do we see this kind of example? Now, it's gotten better as our medicine has improved. We have a lot more C-sections now, whatnot. But so if the baby is born too heavy, there can be complications during pregnancy for both the mother and the baby. So that is not as fit. And then on the other side, a very underweight baby tends to have a lot of associated health problems early on with that. So yeah, so the most fit one is the average infant weight or newborn weight, because yeah, so that would be stabilizing selection. You favor the norm, you don't really want the polar ends. And then next we have directional. And this selection is oftentimes you use a comparison one. So, but we'll talk about it in a little bit. So that is where our population moves toward a particular thing, and like that thing. It's kind of similar to stabilizing one, which is why oftentimes we have a comparison. So let's say that this was our okay, we can actually make this in this example. We can make this human newborn weight as well. Let's say that this was a norm in 1920, and that this will be the norm in I don't know, 19 not 19, and that this will be the norm in like 2050. So let's say that our environment changes such that every baby is born by a C-section, so you don't really have to worry about the head size or anything like that. And for some reason, the larger babies are just more healthy. So this is an example of directional selection, because we moved towards a new thing. We moved in a direction. Okay, and then finally we have, what was it, disrupted selection, which would be the opposite of stabilizing selection. And let's say that over here we're talking about beak size, and then again we have our allele frequencies over here. So let's say that on this given island there are really big seeds that can only be broken by really big beaks, and there are little seeds that can only be picked up by really small beaks. So what'll happen is that but there's very little like medium-sized ones. What'll happen is that the organisms, the birds that have the lower beak size, they are more abundant. I mean, they have that positive trait, and they can be more abundant. So they're like this, but the middle-sized beaked ones aren't. You know, it's not beneficial to be middle-sized beaked, but then it's also beneficial to be large beaked. So there might be something like this. So disruptive, you disrupt the norm, you kind of move away from the average, and you move towards the poles. Okay, and then for the test, generally, when you see like a shift from like, and it seems like the general proportion of the population is moving towards something, evolution is happening, or if something is said to be a fit trait, and that you give it plenty of time, eventually you will also achieve directional selection, where you have a high frequency of that fit of individuals with that fit allele and less of the other one. All right, let's talk about genetic diversity. It seems like that is focused on. So genetic diversity is a measure of how diverse your genes are. I'm sorry, I don't even know why I bothered saying it, but there are a couple of different indications of that. The number of alleles in a given population. So if you have very low genetic diversity, there would only be one allele for every single gene. meaning there's only one possible gene. Yeah. But if you had like 20 different alleles, that's quite a lot of genetic diversity. So it's also called allelic diversity. And you also heard the name the gene pool. If you have a shallow gene pool, you don't have a lot of genes available to you. So let's think about it. What are the downsides to having a low genetic diversity? So low genetic diversity, that would be susceptibility. Oh, I do not know how to spell that, so I'm not going to try. So being vulnerability. I know how to spell that. Vulnerability to disease. More like not really diseases, more like disorders. So that there are a lot of recessive disorders. By having that low genetic diversity, you have a higher chance of having a couple of bad recessive stuff, but you don't have any of the dominant stuff to cover it up and protect you from them. So an example would be the royal family. So there's royal families. They tend to be, at least in the past, to keep the blood royal. There tends to be a lot of patterns of incest. So that results in a much lower gene pool, and recessive diseases tend to run high in royal families because of that. And a low genetic diversity means that a population, so there's a population, less resistant to change. Okay, so that means a population that is used to cold weather, if it had a low genetic diversity, such that the only allele there was for the cold weather adaptation, then once global warming warmed things up, then that population would be kind of screwed because they don't have individuals that can survive. But if you had a population with high genetic diversity, it makes it more adaptable to the environment. So let's see. High genetic diversity, more adaptability, and more adaptability. So another example might be so a concern right now is that corn is very uniform, and if a blight went around, where blight is like a plant disease, because of the low genetic diversity, because of the low genetic diversity, there's a high chance that they would just all die due to the blight, and because you don't have the possibility to have resistant individuals, you're kind of screwed with the corn for that particular species, at least, or strain. Okay, so other means of evolution and their effects. This is the last lecture-ish kind of slide. After that, we'll be going over some practice problems, and then it will be done. Okay, so earlier we talked mostly about evolution via natural selection, which would be the movement of allele frequencies towards fit alleles and the movement away from non-fit alleles. So genetic drift is kind of like the exact opposite. It actually works against evolution, but genetic drift is random changes in a population. So it could happen that an individual dies before they reach sexual maturity, or it could be people die in general, or it might be or like some random event, like I don't know, like an ox just like kills someone. I don't. Why would they about an ox? I'm sorry, I'm just so very tired. Genetic drift. So genetic drift is random, and it can result in alleles being lost in a population due to just random chance. So genetic drift ultimately decreases genetic diversity So we'll say the number of alleles. And genetic drift impacts a smaller population much more. And this is important. Genetic drift impacts a smaller population much more. So larger populations are more resistant to genetic drift because if you kill off a couple of individuals, you probably have more alleles to spare. Whereas a very small population, if you kill like one or two of them, you have a high chance of removing an allele from the gene pool altogether. Okay, next we have mutation. Mutation increases your number of alleles, so it increases your genetic diversity, and this is because you have your regular allele, and then a mutation pops up, and then that is a new allele. So people back then they were like, oh, but natural selection, how would it work? Because eventually, wouldn't you run out of new stuff? Wouldn't you just be all the same? And like, how would you actually get that novel change? And that is through a very, very rare mutation that is positive. Cool. So mutation increases the number of alleles. And then gene flow. Gene flow is other organisms from external population enter population. So it's like gene flow would be migration. So this would ultimately increase the number of alleles in a population. Because let's say that you have a population of 100 people, and then like 200 more people move in. Well, those 200 people, they bring their own alleles, which will bring greater genetic diversity. Okay, now the founder effect is sometimes it's classified as a form of genetic drift, but you don't really need to worry about that. But the founder effect is where a small amount of organisms start a population. And this results in a very low, or very small, that's a better word, very small gene pool, which would also include a lower number of alleles, lower genetic diversity. So there are two examples I can think about this. So the Amish people are somewhat of a founder effect. I think it was only a couple hundred people who actually founded the population. And you'll see that they have a very small gene pool. So traits that the founders happen to have are a lot more common in the Amish compared to outside the world, such as having more than 10 fingers, which is usually very rare, but it is present in much higher proportions in the Amish community. Or another example could be, let's say that you brought a shipment over from Australia and it had like 10 beetles aboard, and these 10 beetles are not usually in North America, but you brought them over, they're invasive, but this entire population will be made out of 10 with only the alleles available to the beetles and maybe mutation. But yeah, so a founder effect can have negative effects because you have a lower number of alleles. Population bottleneck is kind of similar to the founder effect, but a population bottleneck, so what I said by bottleneck is that you kind of reduce. Actually, I don't really know. In the model, they always show like a bottle and it makes sense, but I don't really know how to explain it. But a population bottleneck is usually described as a catastrophic event. I don't know. I don't think I can spell that, so I'm going to do very bad events. Very bad events that kills a lot. So what happens is like, a meteor comes and it kills most of the organisms. And then by chance, it could be that the ones that are left make up the rest of the population moving forward. Maybe they just got lucky. Yeah. Okay, so one more thing I want to clarify is that genetic drift, again, it affects a smaller population much more. And there is a particular characteristic of genetic drift where if there is a neutral mutation, a neutral mutation or like something that like a trait that isn't like recessive, that isn't like negative or positive, it actually has a chance to be fixated within a population. So that means like let's say that in a population of rats and there's no predator around, so their fur color doesn't matter. But if you have a very small population of rats, by chance, due to genetic drift, one of those colors might be fixated because although it's neutral, genetic drift has a chance of doing that. Now, why did I say that? I don't know. It might be important. Wink.